Alrighty, hello and welcome to this AWI Extension WA webinar on EID for Profit and Productivity. I'm Georgia Pugh, AWI Extension WA Project Manager. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and the recording will be made available via YouTube following this live event. In today's webinar, we'll be hearing from expert Mark Ferguson from NextGen Agri and coconut wool grower Ben Webb of Marbarrup Farms. Each presenter will be sharing their tips and experiences and wisdom with EID to help you get the most out of using it going forward to improve your farm's bottom line. You will be given the opportunity to ask questions at the end of each presentation, and both presenters will be hanging around at the end for some discussion at the end of the webinar. Feel free to put through your questions in the chat at any time, or when prompted to, you can turn your mic off mute to ask a question during question time. So that we don't get any interruptions, please make sure you're on mute at all times unless you're asking a question. And feel free to come and turn your video on so that we can see you, which is always nice to know that there's humans at the end of the line, not just talking to ourselves. Now, before I hand over to the presenters, I wanted to first of all give you a bit of a reminder of where things are at in terms of EID requirements in the sheep industry in Western Australia. So the purpose of today's webinar is just to make sure that we're all EID ready. And the reason for this is that EID is now mandatory in WA. So for sheep born from the 1st of January 2025, these all have to be EID tagged. So any lambs born this year need to be EID tagged before leaving the property. Sheep born prior to 1 January 2025, they don't need to EID tags unless they leave the property from 1 July 2026. So if they're leaving the property after 1 July 2026, they will need an EID tag, but if they're leaving the property prior to then, they won't. So the sheep that are born prior to 1 January 2025 can just have their usual visual tag. For scanning requirements, sale yards and abattoirs will be required to scan any sheep and goats with EID tags from 1 July this year. They will be able to continue to use visual tags for those stock born prior to 1 January 2025 up until the 1st of July 2026. So like I said, that 1st of July 2026 is really the final cutoff for EID usage. All other properties and facilities will also be required to EID scan all sheep upon arrival from 1 July 2026. Now, it's important to remember, and the whole purpose of today's webinar is that valuable data can be recorded with EID. Efficiency of recording the data can be markedly improved by using EID. The accuracy of data can also increase compared to visually reading tags. So take the opportunity to collect data when your sheep are already in the yards. And it's also important to remember that you don't need to buy expensive equipment at the outset with EID. Service providers can also be utilised to help. For more information, I'd like you all to check out these websites. So DPIRD, sheep EID information, that's just the QR code on the left, and you can also go to the National Department of Ag, Fisheries and Forestries for some EID information plans as well. I can share these links at the conclusion of the webinar also. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mark Ferguson to give his presentation. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Thanks, G. Welcome all. Great to be chatting with you over there in the West. It's a bit later in the day over here, but yeah, talking to you from Christchurch today, and just got a number of slides to go through. We've been doing a few EID talks for the equivalent network in South Australia, and I see Jodie's online, so we've been doing a fair bit of a few of these for Jodie, and yeah, so I'm sort of covering the similar topics, but I guess sort of taking it from what is a legislative requirement into what is the opportunity, I guess, with EID, and just some examples, particularly a few Kiwi examples of using the information, and then it'll be good to hear from Ben on how he uses EID. So I guess my talk's really about how we use EID in good decision making on sheep properties, and obviously as we all know, we can kind of have done things with brands and tags and dots and whatever, but most farms I go on to and I ask them what the orange dots are, or what the red dots are, or what the blue dots are. No one can remember. And I guess the point of EID is not that. I guess the right question is, what would I need to know? What would I like to know more about my sheep enterprise, and how can EID help serve that, rather than and I guess, rather than sort of, well, we're going to jam some tags in and see what we can do with them and collect heaps of information and then work it out later. There's obviously no one's got any spare time. So it's about what would be efficient in, or how can EID make us more efficient and better sheep farmers. I like some quotes. I won't hit you with too many today, but I guess this one from Thomas Jefferson is pretty true. Knowledge is power, knowledge is safety, knowledge is happiness. And I guess, we've heard knowledge is power a lot, but I think what we've seen over I guess it's a long time now, been in the sheep game since started my PhD in 2005 when I moved to WA. So it's been a while, and I guess it's about that time when EID really became available, and I got to admit I wasn't immediately convinced it was going to change the world, but I guess as we've gone through the last couple of decades, we've sort of started to see how we can do things with a lot more accuracy, and there are opportunities there to kind of to learn more about our enterprises. I think really how EID shifts us from just normal tags, I guess, is the ability to easily connect to different time points. So whether that's 2 points or 3 or 4, and I'm going to give you some examples of these. That's really how we see it empowering. You can do a preg scan on a ewe one day, or condition score on it joining, and then a preg scan on it later on, and join those 2 time points, which it is possible with reading tags, but becomes really easy and quite easy to collect large chunks of data without any real extra effort. Just we really want to endorse what Georgia said at the start, which is you don't need to head out and buy a $30,000 auto drafter and all the bells and whistles. I guess we definitely tell people to start small and start with maybe just an EID reader, and so you can start getting some data, and you can actually collect a lot of information on some of the kit that we've got available today without necessarily investing a lot of money, and you can actually implement that pretty well across doing drafts and stuff without having heaps of gear. Obviously, it's nice to have all the bells and whistles, but the reality is that's often you sort of want to crawl before you run, and starting to get your head around small data sets is a lot easier than big data sets. I guess one of the things that we think there's a fair bit of value in, and that's a number of you have probably done things like lifetime ewe management. You've heard us talk about how condition score impacts on lamb survival and all those things a million times. You've got all the gurus of sheep reproduction science most of them come out of WA. So we know lots of things, but often we haven't. Often people don't really believe them or don't really know the power of some of these things until they see them in their own sheep. And I see EID as a really good opportunity to help us kind of see responses that we know happens in scientific journals, but seeing them in your own sheep is pretty powerful. And hopefully, if the technology works, I'll give you a few examples of this. I'm going to rely fairly heavily on one of our clients in NZ, Marbarrup Station data for this talk. They've been doing or using EID in their animals for a long time, so it sort of gives us an opportunity to go back and see some things. It kind of gives us the opportunity to sort of project forward the kind of data sets that you'll have available to you in 2 or 3 or 4 years if you want to start using EID. And for them, I think it's important, and Richard and Annabelle Subtle, who own Marbarrup Station, and their staff would sort of certainly tell you that they're not tech gurus. They're not sort of, don't worry about keeping up with the latest stuff, but they have just implemented fairly simple systems and made sure they've just collected the data that's relevant to them over a long period of time. And so I guess they're they're no different than you are today in terms of their tech usage. They've made, they've learnt the bits they need to learn to get the information they need, and I don't think would claim to be necessarily the tech gurus, but yeah, important that anyone can kind of do this kind of information. I'm just going to go through some examples of when we go back into the data and have a look. Things like what's the impact of damage on lamb weaning weights. In this instance, the maiden ewes, the two-tooth ewes in New Zealand tend to stay down lower, and so would lamb on flats or on country near the home. And the sorry, I was getting a door closed there. And so that's why they're weighing heavier, but we'd expect them to be lighter in a typical flock if they were managed in a similar way. So these kind of things that might be, it's sort of nice to know, maybe not need to know, but I think as we inform ourselves about what's our ultimate flock structure going to be and that sort of thing, we do need to know what the impact of sort of age group is on some of these factors. So things like that can be handy. The other one that I think is interesting is the impact of obviously birth type on weaning weight. Again, we know that twins are smaller, but and depending on how your management is, that gap between a single and a twin will be different. And again, that's important to know, important to factor in as you're thinking about what's the appropriate feed going into mating. Do I want to join them in condition score 3.5, where we know we'll get more twins, or do I want to join them a bit lighter than that? And where's that optimum? And I guess as we get into more optimized sheep production systems, we want to know these things, and we need to know the numbers, and we can guess what they are, but it's even better if we actually know what they are. And again, this is not stuff that's been hard for them to collect. This is a couple of time points, just knowing, almost just writing down the right tag sequence, as we're tagging or marking that group of animals, we just write down whether that's a twin mob or a single mob in terms of that tag sequence. And so you get, without almost any extra effort, you've got some information to go back and have a look about as to what's happening in your enterprise. One thing that I think is interesting going forward is kind of using EIDs and weaning weights to sort of look at almost pasture quality or pasture or management of those animals, but also, which paddocks are delivering the weaning weights. And so this is going back and looking at all the different blocks that the ewes lambed on, and then the weaning weight of those lambs, and just looking at the range. Obviously, some of those mobs are going to be twin mobs and some are going to be single mobs, but there's also a range within where they were. And so there'll be mob size impacts, there'll be pasture type impacts. But again, these are kind of things that we can get with almost no extra effort, other than a weaning weight of lambs, and writing down some tag sequences. You can start to understand what's going on your farm with more detail. And I think these are the kind of things that we'll get into as we've got more data. And again, not a whole lot of extra effort to do that. What they'll do in that process is sort of changing where you put twins and where you put singles based on some of that information as it goes forward. I guess this is something that we all know that heavier sheep have more lambs. I guess how much you can, afford to either protect that weight at joining or feed towards that weight at joining, or how you manage that animal, and the relative economics of how many or how heavy they are at joining changes a lot between different enterprises. Obviously in WA tend to be lambing a bit earlier, so there's you won't get quite this slope. These are joined in May, so kind of perfect time for sheep. But knowing what that slope is important to know where the economics lie in terms of what sort of weight you should be hitting. These are maiden ewes hitting the ram, and helps inform where we should be sort of targeting those maiden ewes at that first mating, and can help inform how much we can afford to feed those ewes through the previous winter and spring. Often they can be sort of the second-class citizens, maiden ewes on a WA sheep farm. They're kind of pushed around somewhere because they're not going to be pregnant and not going to be having a lamb in that first year of life. But when we know that what the sort of impact of having more weight at them when they hit the ram on sort of that first scanning, we can sort of change we can do the economics about how heavy we should take those ewes through to, and what the value of that is. Again, I guess the point of this is that you can't get this information without EID, because you've got to, well, you can, but it's really hard. So you've got to weigh those animals that rams in, obviously, and then get a preg scan results. And it becomes, again, these are two really easy data points to get with EID, but quite difficult data points to get without EID. And I guess that's the opportunity that we will see going forward, particularly as at a Marbarrup station, their preg scanner is all set up to record that. So at the end of the day, they just get the file with the scan result. He actually tears himself off and gets a weight on day of scanning, and he also records anything a bit light. But he's probably he's the exception, not the norm. But we will see, particularly the scanning industry, to gearing up to provide that sort of service, but also that it's actually not that hard to record that information on scanning day with a wand standing in the right spot, recording it as it goes, or even just running them past a panel, or running them past a wand at the end of scanning. Similar stuff. Again, we know this information really well, that using good condition score have more lambs or conceive more lambs. That's just backing it up. And again, I think some of the opportunities is just really understanding what's going on on these known concepts, but how big those sort of slopes are on your farm, how responsive your ewes are under your management, and therefore where the economics actually optimize for their production. I guess one of the things that, I guess essentially it's enabling us to manage the individual while also managing the mob, while they can be running around together. We still know which ones have done different things previously, and this is an example of that. We're now sort of combining a range of time points. So this is a Marbarrup station data. The yellow line are those that scanned twins at their first mating. The black line is the ewes that scanned as a single at their first mating, and then this is their result in that next mating as a 3-year-old. And so there at a Marbarrup station, we know that on average, a ewe that has twins in a first mating will scan 171 on average in that next mating, whereas those that were a single were a 135 in that next mating. So again, if we know what this response is in your flocks, and it might not be anywhere near this, but if we know where it is and it's a time to, and you're selling down capital stock, or you're getting rid of, or that's a dry time and you're dropping numbers, which you goes, this is the kind of information that at a Marbarrup station we go back in and have a look at now. And so the ewes that leave a Marbarrup are actually ones that have failed on a whole heap of things, and I won't go into all that tonight, but yeah, if you're in New Zealand buying ewes, I wouldn't suggest you buy the culls from a Marbarrup station, because they're measured culls and they are genuine. So again, this is now combining a whole heap of different time points, but I guess gearing that enterprise to know more about what's going on. This is up the road at Marbarrup station, and just, I guess, other ways to use EID. And I guess I'm just providing you examples of how we can use this sort of stuff to better inform ourselves. And so both the Marbarrup and Marbarrup still visually, well, Marbarrup have changed, but yeah, Marbarrup, this is some visual classing they did, decided to take out a particular type of animals based on some information they'd received. And I guess we see lots of people do that, cull animals based on visual inspection on traits that they're looking at. What was important for them to find out was to make sure that they weren't sort of barking up the wrong tree by actually culling the more productive ones, because if you're on phenotype, obviously you don't know which ones are going to be the performers. But on this example, they went through and so black tags were the cows, flocks, were sort of the middle end, and then the tops were the better, or class as the better sheep. And basically you had the same fleece weight, same micron, but 37% more lambs in the top. So that sort of said to them, well, they are the sheep, that's the type of sheep we want, and we'll start heading down that track. And so, yeah, I guess these are the kind of things, if you do want to implement something, EID makes it possible to combine those different data sets to work out which ones are, or yeah, to get the answer to that question. So in that case, we've got a micron, we've got a fleece weight, we've got a classing result, and we've got a preg scan. So 4 different measurements, time points, all coming together really simply to give you a much more informed result than any of those individual measures does themselves. And so, and again, that's the sort of point of this, is bringing those time points together. Up the road back at Marbarrup station now, same sort of story. Nothing much happened in the 2-year-old mating in this particular year, but in the 3-year-old of those same ewes, the ewes that had been classed as tops were scanning significantly better than those that, in this case, they were classed as heavy, which being more wrinkly. But yeah, definitely a lift there in reproduction without any, so not from much body weight difference. Like 600 grams is not going to give you 34% extra lambs. And so, yeah, again, a much higher efficiency ewe through that. Again, if that had been a flat line, we would know that was a waste of time and that classing hadn't worked. So again, informing what's going on in the enterprise. Obviously, when we think about EID, one of the things we think of immediately normally is yeah, that sort of, how do we measure stuff to cull the right animals, and certainly that is something that a lot of people use it for, and will use it for going forward. I guess we just need to, one caution is you have to be holistic. You can't just measure one trait and then select on that, because that is a bit dangerous. EID does improve your accuracy. Measuring does improve your accuracy of selection, but it also means that you might go the wrong way fast if you're actually selecting on the wrong stuff and not selecting in a holistic manner. And hopefully that'll make some sense in a second. But yeah, I guess we often are thinking we can use EID to work out which young ewes get to stay and also which old ewes get to go. And they're the two things that we commonly are doing. And so what's our measurement plan for the young ewes to work out how we select the right ones, or the ones that meet our objective? And again, that'll be different across different people. We don't all want the same production outcome. Some of us might be sort of slanting more towards meat, some will be slanting more towards wool, even though we're all producing wool. And then I guess, yeah, so working out what that breeding objective is, or that sort of farm objective, and then what you should measure, because there's no point measuring a heap of stuff that you're not going to use. That doesn't serve you or anyone. So work out what your drivers are. And then, yeah, I guess the old ewe culling is interesting with, I guess typically it's sort of all one age group go out, but what we know is that there's chunks of those older ewes that have actually been more productive than others over their lifetime, and therefore they can stay as that 6-year-old ewe, or a proportion of them can stay, while there might be 4- and 5-year-old ewes that are actually underperforming that would be better off to go out of the enterprise, and that's what we're seeing. We're also at a Marbarrup now. Jane Mulholland actually from the team does all that work, but they're now recording. They only drench animals that need it or are skinny on, so obviously use refugia with a fair bit of force, because resistance to chemicals is pretty rife in New Zealand these days, and so only drenching, if an animal doesn't need a drench, it won't get one. But we do record, or they record, which animals do require a drench, and they do record any ewes that are classed as light, condition scored as light. They condition score the whole flock twice a year, and that all gets recorded, and so that forms part of their ewe culling policy. And so the ewes that leave are genuine. All the information we know gets incorporated into that process. I probably should have mentioned that they're they're running sort of 8 to 10,000 ewes, so it's a significant enterprise. So obviously it's easy to implement all these principles on 100 ewes, but they are doing it at scale and doing it pretty efficiently. One thing I guess, a word of caution around measuring stuff, and this is a graph I've used a fair bit over the years, but it's just pointing out that singles, as we measure things, we can inadvertently select for singles, and that might be fine if you're a really wool dominant enterprise. But if you're kind of doing that dual purpose thing or slanting more towards meat, then that might not serve you well. So some people might go out there and just start measuring fleece weight for the first time. Now we've got EIDs in. If you do that and you select on fleece weight alone, you will select all the singles. So each of these dots, or there's 2 dots from each, there's a range of size there from a progeny test in New Zealand. You're looking at the fleece weights going, geez, they must have only measured the belly and compared to WA, but obviously lighter cutting animals and lighter cutting production systems in New Zealand generally. But what it's showing is that for every sire, regardless of its genetic merit for fleece weight, which is that breeding value along the horizontal axis, the single progeny from each of those sires always cut more wool, except for one sire out there on the right. But we know that from the work we did on lifetime wool days. But again, this is just showing you what the sort of implement or what that scale might be. And so a bit of a word of caution there that you might accidentally select for singles, and the same thing if you start measuring fibre diameter and fleece weight, then the singles will be finer and cut more wool because of those follicle differences between those two. At any given sort of micron genetic potential for micron, the twins will always be stronger than the singles progeny from any sire. So they're things that we kind of need to tie in when we're thinking about selection. And they are pretty easily to be accounted for, but you have to make sure you are accounting for them. Because what we see in some of the software is we just multiply fleece weight by micron and then rank the animals based on that. And that's risky because that's leading you towards singles from mixed age ewes more than anything else. That's fine if that's what you want to do, but you just need to make sure you know what you're up to. I guess this is work from WA. This is from the MLP project that AWI funded there in WA, all over the place. But this is data out of WA, and this is professional classes classing sheep, and it doesn't matter who did it, whether it was me, you, them. We would all do the same. That when we're classing animals based on visual selection alone, we are heading towards single-born progeny. So in the keep pen, we've got 70% of the single-borns and 30% of twins, and then in the cull pen we've got 30% singles and 70% twins. So not only do we measure, because what we're actually looking at when we're visually selecting merinos is obviously density, the style, quality of that wool, its nourishment, and all those things are actually impacted on by birth type. So, and I guess this is the opportunity with EID, is that we can actually stop ourselves implementing this result by actually knowing who's a single and who's a twin, draft them out before we class them, or actually utilise that information in the process of deciding which ones go and which ones stay. So again, as a really simple, or not a very difficult thing to implement if you're preg scanning for singles and twins, just writing down which tag sequence went into the singles and which one into the twins, you can then on the day before classing or the morning of classing pull them out into 2 different groups for classing, and so you only take the same proportion out of each mob. Again, if heading towards more multiples, or at least maintaining multiples, is something that's of interest for you. That's some pretty cool work there from Bron and Tomo. So I guess sort of pulling that together, if you are heading down the measurement angle of EID in terms of selecting for your replacement ewes, I would advocate that you do more than just fleece weight and micron. Weaning weight's a great one. I think it's a cracker for understanding all the other impacts, those pasture impacts, those single twin impacts. I think that's, so you get some production knowledge out of that, but also you can use it in your selection process. A weight at some sort of age, if you're mating ewe lambs, then that'd be a 7 or 8 month weight. If you're not, then that's an older age weight, that sort of hogget age, post shearing, pre-shearing, somewhere in there. also would love to add a condition score in there. Again, it's not a very hard measurement to get, but it is really well correlated in sheep to their lifetime condition going forward. And so if a ewe is skinny in the cohort at 12 months, she's likely to be skinny for her life. So we would advocate recording that then and being part of your selection strategy. Fleece weight and micron, obviously, we're dealing with merinos and wool cutters, so that's important. And then as you go through, I guess, obviously you won't have that at a hog at selection age, but preg scanning and then wet dry going on, you can kind of build that data set as you go. Things like, are they daggy? We've got a lot of our clients will record dag, which use a daggy, or even put a score against that, so that can become part of the selection strategy. There's parts of WA that are pretty good at collecting dags, and we know that's heritable, and we know that we can, and it's very repeatable. So it's a trait that might be important for you. So yeah, adding all those in if you are, but again, you don't have to start with that kind of list of things to measure. You might not do any of that. You might just get a weaning weight, so you can look at your pasture results on your on lactation of those ewes, or you might start small and just start recording preg scan result from your preg scanner and build that information up. Record those wet dries, or record a few dags. Some simple things that don't require heaps of extra effort. I'm going to keep moving because I'm about to take up all my time, I think. But so if you are even just making sure, as I said before, class ewes in their group, so record who's a singles, who's a twin, who's out of a maiden ewe, who's out of a mixed age. That's not particularly hard if you're scanning for multiples. And then present them in those 4 groups to your classer is a good option, or whether that's you classing it or your wool agent or whoever that is, because that will take out that bias that we naturally all have against those twin-born progeny. Just quickly, we at Marbarrup Station, we actually do a class based on a heap of numbers on the day. So the decision of who stays, who goes, isn't actually made on the day. We actually just record all of the things that you would look at when you're classing. So the structure of feet, we condition score those animals, they get a weight, and then we assess the wool quality, and then an overall class. We know how old mum was from those animals. We know whether they're single born or twin born, and then all of that information goes together in a process. We correct for single and twin, and then we pull out. And so the actual who goes and who stays actually happens on a spreadsheet afterwards, incorporating all the information that's been accumulated. And that sounds maybe horrifying for some people out there, but it actually is the same classing pass that we do every day. The only difference is that we have to get them back in and draft them out after, draft the 2 groups afterwards. But what it does mean is that we are much more thorough in our classing, because we actually record all the stuff we want to look at. We weight that according to our breeding objective, and then we run the numbers. And I think, really pretty excited about how this is going to go. We've done this for a couple of years now, and continuing. It's going to be really good to see how that flock changes as we go through that process. Essentially, what it means is that in our overall classing, that's the proportions, but essentially we don't see that single twin bias. So in the whole mob, there was 27% singles and 53% twins, and 20% where the things didn't go to plan. But essentially, we didn't overcull twins. In fact, we kept a higher proportion. And same deal with dam age. We didn't overcull out of maidens. We actually, so I guess by using all that information, it meant that we didn't sort of bias against our maidens out of our twins out of maidens, or our twins generally, because if we just do visual classing, we end up with sort of singles out of mixed age as a preference. But that, by doing that more thoroughly, we didn't do that, and we also, I think, had a much better probably handle on some of the structural traits that because we had to score it on each animal, it made sure you didn't miss it. And so I think that it's a process that we're honing down as we go. But I think it's good. We didn't include fleece weight and fibre in that case, but that's certainly something you could do if that was interesting. Just quickly, the important thing I think for all those out there today is that if you miss data at landmarking when you're cutting tails off, that's the day where you need to record a lot of that life data, that whether it's a single or a twin, whether it's out of a mixed age or a maiden ewe, if they are in those different groups at lambing, you can record it on those days, and then you can always refer back to it. If you miss it at that point, it's gone. You'll never get that back. And so often we see people maybe put the tags in at weaning, whereas really the richness of the data set comes from at lamb marking. I'm just going to skip through this because I'm going to be out of time, but it is important to have a data plan, and there's different, George has given you some examples there to grab, but simply that means knowing what you want to change in your enterprise and knowing therefore what you should measure to change in your enterprise, rather than measuring lots of stuff and then working out what you do with the information. So yeah, I think that's something that you'll get. There's going to be plenty of support around to help sort of, I guess, through that process, but certainly worth just thinking about what is the sort of minimum things I want to measure, and there might be zero, but I'll just go over that one. I think we're done pretty much. Just really quickly mention a project funded by AWI and MLA Precision Sheep Management. So it is and run with Adelaide Uni and Murdoch Uni. So and a whole heap of others, including us. But it is designed to help you sort of look into some of these opportunities. Some of the things I've mentioned, there'll be some support to do that kind of stuff on your farms. Yeah, I guess just wanted to let you know that is happening, and get in touch with the team there at DPERD and Murdoch Uni and WA. Both those groups are involved in the project, and so you can find some. They'll be coming to you looking for sites, looking for R&D sites, and looking for some demonstrations as well. So there's some opportunities there to get involved and get some support around some of this stuff, because yeah, it's seeing is believing, I guess. I might hand back to you there, Georgia. I think I'm about done.
Thanks a lot, Mark, for that wonderful presentation. If anyone's got a question, you can shoot that through now or come off mute for Mark. Otherwise, Mark will be hanging around. We're going to have some more questions and discussion at the end of the next presentation. So I'll just pause for a moment in case anyone wanted to ask a question right now. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next presenter. Okay, great. Ben Webb, you can now come and join us. Turn off on your camera if you're able to, mate, and come off mute. But Ben Webb of Marbarrup Farms is going to share some of his experiences with EID. Take it away, Ben. Thanks a lot, mate.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for listening, and I hope everyone's well. So we live in WA, Kojonup, halfway between Koji and Brooks, our farm. In the high rainfall zone, we get about 535 mils per year, winter dominant. We get summer rain sometimes, but very sort of unreliably. So May to sort of November is our growing season. We're in the middle of seeding at the moment. We've got the canola in, lupins, beans and stuff, and doing a bit of barley. Probably move on to the wheat in another week or so. We run a mixed enterprise. We've got only merino sheep, and then crop, canola, barley, beans, lupins, wheat, a bit of silage and hay sort of opportunistically, which we make in the spring, and then when we're seeding, we put the sheep in confinement and feed them that silage back to let the pastures, to defer the pastures and let them get away. So that's sort of happening now. We did have some nice early rains, which is good, but May's been a bit dry, so hopefully we've been getting enough, but a bit more rain in the next week or two would be handy. So we breed rams for merino tech. Oh, here we go, here's a video playing. That's the auto drafter weighing some young ewes for sale. Yeah, so we've been breeding rams for Renatec for a fair while now. We started off with the visual tags, which was very hard work. You'd have to read each tag when you were doing a measurement, and there'd be a lot of mistakes, a lot of double numbers. You'd read the numbers the wrong way around. And then we'd enter everything into Excel, which was a process, and you needed a lot of people and so on. And when you'd finish, you'd have to sort out all the mistakes, and which took a lot of time. And about 15-ish years ago, we started with the electronic tags, and that's been a bit of a game changer for us on the Renatec side of things. About 3 years ago, when they started talking about making EID mandatory for all of the sheep, we started using them in the commercial flock. So quite a few of them have EIDs now, but not all of them. We record if they're a twin or a single. It's about as far as we've got at the moment. On the screen, you can see our sheep yards, sort of all undercover now to try and keep the sun off everyone and the gear nice and clean. On the left, we've got just a drenching race, drafting race. In the middle, there's a visual classing crate. That's just a homemade sort of crate, which those gates we sort of swing across. So everything's in place. When we started, we were shifting scales in and out and all sorts of stuff, but that wasn't for me. So we thought, rightio, we'll set everything up so it stays there and makes life a lot easier. If you quickly want to weigh a few sheep, everything's there ready to go. And then to the right again, there's the Prattley auto drafter. So that's got a clamp, scales as well. We can tip it on its side if there's things you want to do there for doing mid-side samples and so on. And then to the right is just ordinary drafting. So if the stock agent comes, he can draft them of a sheep, whether lambs or whatever, without any dramas of interfering with all the EID equipment. So the data that we collect, it starts off at preg scanning. So we set the crate up at the end of the drafting race. The contractor scales, as the contractor's equipment's not set up yet, but I just stand there with the wand and I'll scan the sheep and he'll call out, wet, dry, single, twin, and I'll just press 1, 2, or 3. So it's pretty basic, doesn't slow him down at all, which is good. And throughout the year, we use the different races and stuff to check their feet, wool, back fat, eye muscle, jags, worm egg counts, structural sort of faults, all of which is collected and stored in the. I've got a Panasonic Tough Book, which I take down to the yards and sit on those 44-gallon drums. So we use Shearwell tags, and the program we use to store all the data is Sapien Cool Collect, which we've had a pretty good run with, and they've got excellent backup. So when there's a problem with setting the gear up, whether it's not talking to each other or something, we can just get on the helpline and they'll sort us out. We just remote the telephone so they can remote access the computer, which is very handy because I'm not very tech savvy. So all that data is stored, and then we use that. Here's another video of the sheep yards. I think we're drafting off some non-mulesed lambs at weaning time there. So when we're shearing, another video. So when we're shearing, we scan the sheep with the stick reader, and then that's connected to a little barcode printer. So we rip the barcode off and put it on under those little spray bottles on the board, and then the Rouseys, when they finish shearing the sheep, they'll grab the fleece and the barcode, and then carry it over to that table there. And I'll scan the barcode with the fleece on the table, and then that records the fleece to that sheep, and that goes straight into the computer. Before shearing as well, we do do a mid-side sample out in the yards on their back here on their pin bones, and then those samples are sent off to GenStock to get the micron and the micron and the yield tested. And that's all put back into the computer as well. Now there's another picture of that's the classing crate there on the left, and then where Tamisha's there doing a back fat scan, eye muscle depth, a body weight, and a condition score. So that's in February when the rams go out. We put the rams out sort of middle of Feb. That's a bit more data we're collecting there, and then you can see me there typing something into the computer. So that's a quick sort of rundown on the Marinotech side of things. In the commercial sort of side of things, I don't do a lot of recording yet, but I would like to in the future be able to count the sheep through the race. So set the panel readers up at the end of the drafting race or the drenching race or whatever we're doing at the time. And hopefully that can pick up, save a job at the end and count them all. We've sort of haven't had a lot of luck yet. We're going to try and set a panel reader up on each side. We've had just one on the side of the ear tag, but I think there's a bit too much interference with the metal in the sheep yard, so we're going to put wood where the panels go. But yeah, that just sort of saves a job at the end, and you can let them sort of straight out, having a good number, which would be handy. We'll probably start collecting some repro data from the commercial flocket scanning, which is pretty easy, doesn't slow anything down. And when we're tagging, tagging the lambs at tailing time, we tag sequence. So I know the twins belong between tag, say 100 and 1500, and then the singles from then on. So when we're going back through the ewe hoggets the following spring, we can identify which ones are born as a twin or a single. So when we're classing them, we can try and take that effect out of it. Also doing a few. We've been with the demise of the live sheep trade. We've been trying to put a bit more weight on the lambs over the summer. So selecting for weaning weight's been one of the things, and we've been trialing fodder crops, so a legume fodder crop or an oat fodder crop or vetches or something along those lines, because we find the sheep grow along nicely and then you wean them and then the pastures are all good and everything's going well. And then we start harvesting and then things start dying off and then the sheep might not get as much attention as they possibly need. So we've been putting them into fodder crops then, and that sort of takes the pressure off us labour-wise during harvest. And then the sheep have been doing very well on those fodder crops, and then they're sort of, we shear in March, the main shearing's in March, and then once they're shorn, they're sort of ready to go to the abattoir without a heap of hand feeding. And this year we've got a trial with Ed Riggle from AgPro Management, and we're with the EID tags, we'll use the body weight, so we'll get a weaning weight, then they'll go into their grass for a while, and then they'll go into the fodder crop. So we'll probably get another body weight, sorry, when they go into the fodder crops, and then a couple of times through the summer. So we're going to compare the lupins and faba beans and possibly oats. We haven't had a lot of luck with oats. I don't think there's quite enough protein and stuff in the oats, but yeah, it's good to sort of put some numbers around there. In the ram breeding flock, we run a portion of the flock's non-mules, which you can see some of them there. So we can, which is quite interesting, comparing body weights and fleece weights and weaning weights with the non-mules versus the mules sheep. I wouldn't mind trialing the OptiWay in the future to just so I can get some ideas on how the lambs are ticking away out in these paddocks. So hopefully we can to see how they're going. I think that would be handy. And then yeah, put a bit more effort into getting the tag readers so we can read all the tags when we're putting them on trucks or counting mobs. So yeah, happy days. It's my next slide. That might be it. So yeah, back to Georgia. But any questions, I'd be more than happy.
Thanks, Ben. And thanks a lot, Mark. We are going to open up to the audience for some questions. So just hang around for us, please, Ben and Mark. And Mark, if you're still there, you've turned your camera on. Excellent. We had a couple of questions come through from the audience for Mark just while Ben was chatting. The first question, Mark, was, is there a way of not having to record single and twins at lamb marking, but drafting off ewes into twins and singles at scanning time and presetting the tags at lamb marketing? So setting stock in their lambing groups to not require staff to be there for the lamb marketing component. This is an instance where they're solely using contractors.
I mean, really, the way to do that is to make sure you only give those contractors a set of, or know which numbers you give. All you need is someone to write down the start of the tag sequence and the end of the tag sequence that go into that mob, and then you'll know where they, because you'll get, not sure, I might be telling you to suck eggs, but you can get a tag bucket which is EID matched to the visual ID, and that comes from your tag manufacturer when you get those tags, and so all they have to do is write that visual tag down that they start with and end with for each mob, and then that basically later on you can go back and assign single, twin, mixed age, maiden, whatever against that tag, because you know which mob it went into. So yeah, I guess the zero effort is, well, bugger all effort is just make sure that you know which tag numbers went into which mob, and then you can work all the rest out later.
Thanks, Mark. And another question for you. With the bog roy data, were the 2-year-old ewes and 3-year-old ewes given 2 shots to get in lamb, or were they 1 shot and they were culled? And did that raise the scanning percentage?
That's a good question. That's actually a little bit old, that data set now, so I'm not sure, but I'm just going to run with, I think it's probably, they probably did cull dries in that first instance, so the mixed, it would have been culled as anything dry would have been culled after the first hit, and so that response that we saw in the second mating was, yeah, just more whether they were a single twin to start with, right? Yeah, so the dries would have been knocked out each time, I think, but I don't know that for 100% sure certainty.
No worries, thank you. And Ben, I might hand over a question to you. What's your top tip for someone getting started, particularly if that person is not super tech savvy or hasn't got a huge amount of experience? Where did you start when you first thought about using EID back in the day?
Yeah, well, that's I'm not definitely not tech savvy myself. When things have changed a fair bit since when we've started. I'd probably stick with a stick reader for the start, and you can sync that with your telephone, so you can scan the sheep, and you can make files and stuff up in there with what you're doing, and then email that to your telephone, and then you've got that sort of information. But yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. There's not much you can't do with a stick reader.
And were there ever go Mark, what did you want to add to that?
Oh no, I'm just giving Ben the full thumbs up. That's 100%.
Has there ever been an instance where something just didn't work for you, Ben? And how did you get around that?
Yeah, so regularly, I'm getting better at sorting the things out now, but the helplines are very good with TrueTest or Sapien or they're all very, very, very good. So as long as you've got telephone reception, and we've found that sort of every time we've sorted the problems out, because often it's you've checked the wrong box somewhere or done a software update and something's changed or something silly. But yeah, no, the helplines are the way to go.
I'm going to put you on the spot here, Ben, but what kind of return on investment, or give us a ballpark, whether you're ahead or behind with EID, and what would be the number one thing that would be helping you achieve that result in terms of decision making?
Or just the time thing on the ram breeding enterprise, because it's just a lot easier and quicker and simpler, and everything just sort of happens. I don't know if I could put a dollar on it.
Are you ahead or behind?
I'd like. Yeah, I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't do it otherwise. Definitely, yeah. It's too hard.
Terrific. What about you, Mark? Have you got any other top tips or examples of where that return on investment can be really accelerated? And any examples of tools or software or hardware you'd like to point out to everyone?
No, I think yeah, while I definitely advocate starting simple, I think once you get, there is going to be 2 or 3 years where it is a bit of a hard grind. Like you're sort of collecting, like the first year you've only got that 1 year of repro, and then you obviously you need to build from a low base. But yeah, so there is a bit of upfront investment, a couple of years of effort that probably has you scratching your head about whether it's any use or not. But I think then the rewards start to flow. So there is a bit of a slow thing. I think something like DAG, or because it is so repeatable and quite and heritable as well. Like, I don't know who out there likes dagging sheep or likes flies, but not many. And so it's so like something simple like that you can record against animals without and probably have a good impact on the flock. Don't think you're changing worms. You're not. You're just changing DAG because they're not correlated. But yeah, I mean, obviously you want to buy rams with the right information as well, ideally. But yeah, something like that is a simple trait that can kind of, is a nice visual trait that you can kind of go, well, last time it also, I scanned it last time, it said it was dagging, and it's dagging again, so it can go somewhere else. But yeah, those sort of simple things. If you are thinking about heading down that non-mules line, then recording wrinkle is another one that's pretty easy in the marking cradle or mules in cradle, and just start to get some information around that. But I guess, yeah, I think, I don't know, getting a weaning weight on your lambs, and just making sure you're ideally knowing who's single, who's twin, and then not having that classing impact. I think that for all enterprises that have a lamb focus, that we have inadvertently been knocking out twins out of our selections, just phenotypically. So I think that in itself, and again, you can do that with a notch. You don't need an EID to do that, but an EID is well, you can. It's easier. It's something that you can record other data as well. But haven't really answered that very well. But I think, yeah, I guess I've gone from being a major skeptic to someone who can really see the value now, particularly the more information we get around us, and I think we're getting much better at culling sheep.
And Mark, you mentioned the wand is a good place to start, but is there anything else that you see as being really, really helpful with good operations with EID?
I think any old way, obviously a weigh box that can link to EID, and a wand that you can, probably a wand that you can enter data on, I'd say is like a major lift. Like you can get a wand that's just a slave. It just sends the EID to whatever you've got it hooked to. But the ones that you can actually enter data against, and means that your one hand, and like you actually almost can enter, well, once you've used them a bit, you can enter data as fast as you can think, pretty much. And I think that really has changed certainly in our enterprise, where we spend a lot of time collecting lots and lots of data with lots of different people in different places. It changed the system. The other thing I'd probably like to add is that you don't need fancy bells and whistles software to do this either. Like, if some pretty basic, there's about 4 formulas we use in Excel that will bring all this data together, and that's XLOOKUP and a pivot table and maybe a couple of average formulas and stuff. But you can actually make this data sing pretty well with some pretty basic Excel skills. And I know that seems easy for me to say. We live in that world, but yeah, I've seen lots of farmers use Excel really well, and or even Google Sheets. You don't even have to pay for Excel. But yeah, so again, you don't want to send yourself into a situation where you've got kind of overwhelmed because it's all new and different. The same gear you might have been using Excel to keep a track on yields and stuff, you can use the same skills in your sheep data. There is really, you can get a long way with just Excel and a wand, and that's pretty much what we do. A lot is just keep it pretty simple. Don't get blown away by fancy gear if you don't need it, because often yeah, often you kind of buy a Ferrari just to go and get milk at the shops once a week or whatever. We're in first gear, like we don't utilize half the things that, or not even 10% of the capability of some of the gear that we end up, or the software we end up buying. We can keep it pretty simple in Excel.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thanks, mate. Unless there's any other burning questions coming out from the audience, we might wrap the question time up then. But I do have a couple of slides I want to keep showing everyone. So yeah, last chance to shoot through some questions. But while you're doing that, just wanted to make sure that you all remember that you can keep in touch with AWI Extension WA, and we can share the contact details for Ben and Mark, so that you can follow up any additional questions later as well. But here are all the channels you can keep in touch and stay up to date with AWI Extension WA going forward. And don't forget to subscribe to our quarterly newsletter. But thank you everyone for joining today, and yeah, really appreciate your time for the guest speakers, Ben and Mark. Really appreciate it. Really great presentations. But once more, thanks for the guest speakers today, and thank you everyone for attending. We'll wrap things up there. Cheers.